All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is the first event hosted by Black Feminisms Now, which is a Borghese Mellon workshop sponsored by the Center for Humanities at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My name is Brittany Edmonds, and I'm a junior faculty member in the Department for Afro-American Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Along with my two workshop co-leaders, I'm very excited and very appreciated to welcome you and express my gratitude for you joining us all today. This event, Scholar-Activism and Wellness, a Forum on Balance, is more timely than ever. And we're pleased to give you an outline of the event and to welcome our esteemed panelists. The event will proceed with 2 rounds of questions from workshop leaders, a second round where panelists ask questions of each other, and finally, in the remaining time, a round for questions from the audience. And now to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist today is M. Adams. M. Adams is a community organizer and co-executive director of Freedom, Inc. Born and raised in Milwaukee, Adams has been in Madison since 2003. Adams's dad has been incarcerated for most of their life, and they come from a community that has been the extreme targets of police violence. In March 2016, Adams's mother transitioned after fighting cancer and many forms of violence. Adams is also a parent and sees their family as a motivator for their work. As a Black queer person, Adams has developed and advocated for a strong intersectional approach in numerous important venues. Adams is a leading figure in the Take Back the Land movement. They have presented before the United Nations for the Convention on Eliminating Racial Discrimination. They are a co-author of Forward from Ferguson and a paper on Black community control over the police. Additionally, they are an author to Intersectionality Theory and Why Killing Unnamed Black Folks is a Queer Issue. Adams can be regularly seen in person, on television, in the newspapers, giving presentations, testifying at city council meetings, and energizing crowds at protests. M. Adams, welcome. Our next panelist is Dr. Janean Dilworth-Bart. Dr. Janean Dilworth-Bart resides in Madison, Wisconsin, with her husband, 2 children, dog, cat, and a multitude of backyard woodland creatures. She is the Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs and Graduate Education in the School of Human Ecology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She earned her BA in psychology from Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia in 1995, and obtained her PhD in psychology with a clinical emphasis from Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, in 2001. She and her students in the Child and Family Ecologies Lab study how early developmental contexts help or hinder children's development into competent, productive members of society. They focus especially on the lives of Black families, including fathers' experiences, the development of biracial children, co-parenting influences on self-regulation and school readiness, and the impact of the physical environment on child and family well-being. Dr. Dilworth-Bart, welcome. Our final panelist is Dr. Sami Schalk. Dr. Sami Schalk is an associate professor in the Department of Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her research focuses on disability, race, and gender in contemporary American literature and culture, especially African American and women's text. Dr. Schalk's first book, Body Minds Reimagined, Disability, Race, and Gender in Black Women's Speculative Fiction, was published by Duke University Press in 2018. Dr. Schalk's work has also appeared in a variety of journals, such as the Journal of Literary and Cultural Disability Studies, Journal of Modern Literature, Journal of Popular Culture, Girlhood Studies, and African American Review. Dr. Schalk teaches courses on disability studies, Black feminism, intersectionality, and literature, such as gender and social justice literature, gender, disability, and sexuality, and adaptations of Black women's literature. Dr. Schalk, welcome. So we'd like to once again thank all of our panelists for joining us today, for extending their time and their energy in this moment of great duress. We're nevertheless all excited to be here, and we're going to go ahead and get things kicked off. So the first question that we would like all of our panelists to address is, please define scholar activism and please define wellness in your own lives and practices.
Do we have an order?
Anyone can feel free to jump in. It's a forum.
All right, I'll define one word and then somebody else can define. So I was thinking about wellness today, and I think for me, especially as a disability studies scholar, I don't like defining wellness strictly through ideas of like health and medical parameters. For me, wellness is much more holistic. Wellness is about like capacity for feeling, particularly capacity for pleasure and satisfaction. Like I know something is off in my world and in my wellness when I am like numb to the world and I can't actually feel. So that is something when I feel when my resilience is low, when just like one thing can just like, you know, I drop a glass and then I'm just like on the floor crying. I'm like, okay, something's happening here. So for me, wellness is this holistic feeling of being in touch and not even necessarily in control, but just of having capacity to deal with whatever is coming my way. And so when I am not in that place, I know that I need to then take care to get myself back up, to fill up, you know, my own cup, as we say, right? So that wellness is physical. It is about my well-being, you know, making sure that I get up and then I move and I'm like eating things that are good for me, as well as things around resting and taking pleasure and connecting with people. So those are things that I use to consider what wellness means in a holistic sense.
So, Sami, I'm going to add to that because this is an experience that I've been having recently in terms of wellness is for me also recognizing where I am right now. So it's not, wellness and happiness are not the same thing. So sometimes when I'm able to embrace the fact that, oh, and if any of you are like me, Wednesday morning I woke up and I was a bit shook. And so recognizing that, um, okay, I'm having this feeling right now, and this feeling is hard, or I'm having this feeling right now, and this is a great feeling, but not turning my back from that. For me, the ability to do that is wellness, because something that I've struggled with is I'll just push all that down and walk around with an S on my chest. But that's not wellness. That's something else. And then I'm going to dive into this idea of like scholar activism, because I've been thinking about this because I really never thought of myself as an activist, and then until recently, I recognized, having gone through the process of getting tenure and then getting promoted to full at the University of Wisconsin. I had finally embraced the fact that my presence in the space is a revolutionary act. My presence as an associate dean is a revolutionary act. And I might not, as I admire seeing all of you who go out and are at the front of the protest, that's not been my role in the movement, but that doesn't mean that I haven't had a role. And so as I've embraced what it meant in my practice, to be an activist, it's those quiet moments when I'm in a position where I can make a change that maybe nobody will ever actually know where that came from, or they might not even see it and or recognize it for what it is until 10 years down the line when something has snowballed. And so that's kind of how I've seen my role and my own activism. And then there are now places where I feel like I'm a little bit more comfortable. So as before we started the event today, I was talking about how I've started really talking with early childhood educators who are mostly white middle class women about how Black Lives Matter is relevant even for children aged 3 to 5, and that they have a role in anti-racism if they are if they are the people that they proclaim to be. And so that's where activism is showing up in the work that I do, and wellness along the way, because as a Black woman, as a scholar, as a mother talking around issues of childhood, it's also deeply personal. And so I have to recognize in those moments that, yep, I know all of this stuff intellectually, but that I do have a part in this. This is something that's deeply personal, and recognizing the balance and the need for self-protection around that.
Hey, everybody, and thanks again for having me here today. So I think about Toni K. Bambara, who just moves me in many different ways. And I want to borrow from her text, Salt Eaters, in which she says, and I'm just going to read a little bit. Are you sure, sweetheart, that you want to be well? Just so you're sure, sweetheart, and ready to be healed, because wholeness is no trifling matter. A lot of weight when you're well. So when I think about what exactly is wellness, I think it's a journey in which we all, for me, a journey in which I confront things that seek to cause me harm or death in some form or another. And I think that looks like a lot of different things in different times. So I think about wellness certainly as a person who's committed my life and myself to movement. I think a key part of that is confronting systems through my daily being of um, organizing, direct action, and a host of other things. Community building for me is an essential feature of wellness, because wholeness, wellness, because it is one of the things that I do to stop that which seeks to cause me harm and to create space to build the thing that I deserve and I should be in. I also think it means some particular things for who and how I choose relationships, right? And I think, it's a journey, right? How we evaluate what's good for us, how we evaluate things that are healthy for us, or things that seek to edify us or reify us versus harming us. I think the same thing with my body. I think for many people um, who are like me, who are fat people, and I use that word to describe my big, beautiful body, but also to ground a politic. Uh, I think, that's a complicated question around how do we confront a society that tells us we're bad and seeks to destroy us, and confront standards of normalcy, of white heteropatriarchy, capitalism, and a host of other things, and still, live longer than my mother, who left us at the early 50s. And so for me, these are all questions that I sit and grapple with. So to sum it up again, wholeness and wellness is my journey in trying to answer or trying to resolve the contradictions or the different things that I brought up. And so it's a journey, it is a practice, it is a seeking to return to center, whatever that is for me, and being accountable to a community that seeks to build me up, to keep me here, because I definitely think wholeness and wellness is connected to a broader we as a people.
Thank you all so much for
Can I,
providing those.
can I just
you're
jump
gonna
on
add one more
that?
thing? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, really emphasize that, like, not the lack of a focus on individuals, I think is so important, because when we have these like wellness initiatives at work, it's always like, go walk. It's just like all on us, right? And so I think that what Em's bringing up is so important, that wellness is also about recognizing the ways that like some of the things that are happening to us are not our fault, and that it actually requires like us to work together to create spaces of wellness, because you can't just look at someone and be like, well, you should, walk and eat this way and do this thing, and then be like, but you have to like work 2 jobs and take care of all your kids. Like, when's that going to happen, right? So I think that it's really important that wellness is placed in this, really political context, to understand that it requires systems as well as communities to work together. Like, we also all have different skill sets, right? Like, some of us are able to be emotional supports in ways that other people aren't. And that means that we need to share those skill sets with one another for us to be well.
Thank you. Thank you, Sami. That really built on the next question that I'm going to ask. And just to introduce myself briefly, I'm Shireen Shura-Johnson. I am with Dr. Lindsay and Dr. Edmonds, one of the co-organizers of this Borghese Mellon workshop. So I'm so glad to see all of you here. I really appreciate us beginning with these grounding definitions, especially because right now within the realm of wellness, we're in a capitalist society, and then everyone is very aware that there's this wellness industry that is very much not geared towards women of color. And although sometimes it is geared towards women of color, but I think in the ways that Dr. Schalk already made clear that it's very individualized. So I really love this expansive, but also collective definitions that, and very different actually definitions that you're giving. So the first question that I had, or at least in this round, has to do with something you also just talked about, which is the idea of work-life balance. And so we've really reframed this for women of color as kind of a work-life imbalance. And so I would like all of you to share some strategies with us for how to address that. And I just smiled a little when you mentioned like another seminar, because we always have these sessions, you know, at the university, how to manage work-life balance. And for us, I think it really is a work-life imbalance. And so I'd love to hear in your lives how you've been able to try and ratify that.
I'll take a shot at this. So I think that it really is an imbalance. The way that part of how I'm learning, and I'm still learning how to deal with this, is this imbalance really gets back to this idea of wellness that I talked about, that wellness and happiness are not the same thing. And sometimes what I struggled with was sometimes my feet would get stuck in racism on the way to work. Or walking down the hall to get a cup of coffee, or going to Whole Foods, or something like that. And I would just try to say, well, what do I expect? I live in Madison or whatever, rather than saying, oh, you know what? This is an actual burden that's taking something from me. And so some of the strategies that I've taken on is owning that feeling, not saying that this is my fault or anything like that, but saying, oh, this is overwhelming right now. My feet are stuck in racism. My feet are stuck in sexism or politics right now. And so that's the way that I've learned to truly try to deal with that imbalance, because there are a lot of things that are completely out of our control. It is really difficult when, like, I study Black and biracial children. As a mother of biracial children, of course I have a personal stake in these in this work. And so I've embraced the imbalance. I've embraced that and said, okay, this is the thing that I am choosing to struggle with. And then there are other things that I choose not to struggle with. There are things that I found were too stressful for me and it might have had a professional cost, but it was a professional cost that I was willing to pay. I hate conferences. I hate conferences because I feel vulnerable as a Black woman traveling to a city by myself in a field like psychology that is breaking away from its traditional white male sort of leanings. So I don't go. I might pay for that, but that's okay because I'm paying professionally maybe, but I'm gaining, I'm earning in terms of how I feel in my spirit.
I can go next. So I guess two things that are coming up for me with this is, one, I have been really working hard to distinguish between paid labor and my life's work, because sometimes those things overlap and sometimes it doesn't. So making really clear boundaries of my paid labor, where Like I get weekends, I'm not answering your emails at 6 o'clock at night. Like I get to stop working. And I think for those of us who are not just in the academy, I mean, like Freedom Inc. folks, y'all work all day, every day, all the time. Like the work never stops, right? So there have to be ways that you like just create boundaries when you're doing the kind of work that paid labor that can kind of be a mat for us, like you could do it at any time. So I think that's one thing. And then remembering that like the life's work is like I don't have to do anything but be Black and die. Like my liberation is my work. And so that means that I take breaks. That means that I find time for pleasure. And those things are what help me with work-life balance, is remembering that like at the end of the day, the work that I do to take care of myself, because the rest of the world is trying to not take care of me and to harm me, the things that I do to take care of the people I love and my community, that is the work. And that is the thing that brings me balance. It's not the paid labor. We are really lucky when our paid labor does that. Like I am very lucky that I get to go into a classroom and teach about race issues and like help spread the good word, you know, of anti-racism in the world. But then I also have to be in faculty meetings and grade 8 million papers. And those do not feel like liberation work. That is paid labor. And so those things are different. And I think that distinguishing that and not getting caught up in this capitalist idea that like what the paid labor we do is the thing that defines us, and that our careers need to look like what white men's academic careers look like. Like it doesn't look like that, and I don't want it to. So I think that those are some of the things that I do. And yeah, just really emphasize to myself that like me taking care of me having a weekend is the work. Like my ancestors work real hard for me to not have to work. So I better take some time off when I have time off. So yeah, I think that has been that framework shift has been really important for me to address that imbalance that I definitely had for a very long time.
And avoid the guilt when people say, well, why aren't you volunteering? This idea of volunteering is volunteering your good work to be on a committee or something like that just takes a piece of you. It really does deserve to be recognized.
There are several, to build off of what was shared, there are several things that, you know, I grapple with that shape how I determine if I'm in balance or in alignment with like my wellness path. So one set of things is like the fact that I am Black and just the extreme exploitation of people like me, you know, historically and currently, has me have very particular ideas around wage, labor, pay, and a bunch of stuff, right? So I'm like, depending on who it is, what it is, how much, or if I'm going to do it, or if I'm not going to do it, or I'm going to respond, if I should respond. I mean, right, those things are always ever present. I think the compass of Black feminisms, of Black queer feminism, of Black leftist feminist materialism, and all those things that really challenge the ways that patriarchy and capitalism have interacted in our lives to force, you know, in particular, women, queer, trans, intersex folks to do care work. And I struggle with that because I'm also a parent, right? I've also had to care for my mother in her terrible battle against cancer that she eventually transitioned from. So I'm saying that to say, what is balance inside of that, inside of an empire, inside of a thing that is actively trying to kill you? I think of Lucille Clifton, shout out, because I'm still here. But I think of like, something that's actively out to get us, and how do you strike balance inside of that? And how I see myself in all of that, right? I see myself as a protagonist of struggle. I see myself as someone where things is not just done to me, but that in fact I get to be an actor and shape my conditions and shape history and be a part of a movement. That said, I be working a lot. That's like just the fucking truth. Sorry, I'm cussing, but I'm trying to talk to you. But I be working a lot is the short answer. And sometimes it really lines up. sometimes my kids really enjoy the movement and experience the benefits. And then as a result, they've got all types of aunties and uncles that are real for them. And like folks really show up and are part of the movement. Like my wedding, all of my best men were mostly all of them, they were like from the movement, right? So there's just incredible benefit and connection and like humanness you get in that really feeds and fuels. And because of that, there are times I don't step away where maybe I should take breaks. And so it's just difficult to name. Like right now is it a perfect example, right? I'm like, I had a particular objective. I think we hit that objective here in Wisconsin. Do I get to take a break? No, because I got this other stuff happening that I have to attend to. So I don't really have a finite, perhaps, answer as so much as a set of considerations that I think about that really shape if I think I'm in balance or not. And I can say, as I get older, I'm 35 now, I can see where some things are going to have to shift so that I don't develop particular health issues. And so balance now just might be different than what it was at a different time. And so I think, the needle for that could also move.
Can I add another thing too? In that, like, when you were saying, like, can I take a break? And sometimes the answer is just no. I've been thinking a lot lately about, being asked to do something when you like want to take a break and feeling like you have to because maybe nobody else like can or will, or this idea of like, we don't have any other person of color to be on this committee or do this thing. And I have really tried, tenure helps, but I've really started to try to be like, that sounds like a you problem, that you don't have enough people of color here. That doesn't sound like a me issue. Maybe you should hire more of us if you want more of our labor instead of just extracting it from the like 7 of us that you have. So really trying to be like, not all the work has to be done by me. Like of course I'm special, but I'm not like the only person that can do the labor. And so really emphasizing like there are other people with these skill sets and this knowledge. Maybe you should also be hiring and paying them and working with them and training these other people. Because I think there's a way that sometimes when you work within like predominantly white institutions, they try to make the few of us feel special and then give us all the labor as a result. So just really emphasizing like, that's an issue that you need to fix then, not make me work more.
Thank you. Yeah, those are all really great strategies and important perspectives. Along those same lines, I wanted to ask about mental health and support services. Along these same lines in terms of wellness, but when it's time or when one needs to seek out mental health support and some of the roadblocks that you might see that people of color face in seeking that professional help when they need it.
I have a therapist. I love my therapist. She's great. I get anxious, I get depressed, I get stressed out, I get worried, I get really angry. Don't let this calm demeanor fool you. There's a lot of rage in here. Um, and I realized that I needed to start talking about that because, I've been walking around with an S on my chest and suffering. I see my therapist on Tuesday. I already know what I'm going to talk about. And I think that some of the barriers are this mental health stigma. And the only way that that goes away is that we ask for help and that we own our need for help. So it is a vulnerable place. I will admit that I'm like, ooh, should I say in public that I have a therapist? Y'all, I have a therapist. My kids have a therapist. They call into the house. We do all of that stuff. And we need it right now. But the barrier to that, there's a stigma. I don't have a Black therapist. I need a Black female therapist. I have a white female therapist, and that's a struggle for me. And, I remember I started with her and I said, look, I'm going to be really Black in here with you. Is that okay? And, oh, that's fine. And she wasn't quite like that, but oh, that's fine. I wouldn't expect you to be any other way. I was like, I don't think you understand yet. And I'm going to go there with you because I think that you have skills that I need. Um, but I know, and we talked openly about this, I know that there are things you're not going to be able to help me with. But there are some things that you can help me with, and that was the big barrier for me. That was what kept me going. And there are a limited number. There are some Black mental health professionals, women of color in Madison and in the area, that I highly recommend. It just did not, for, of course, insurance reasons, work out that way for me. But I really think it's very important that you find the path to, again, wellness for you. So it's with my therapist, and practicing yoga are really important to me, and hanging out with my dog. They're really important to me as part of my mental well-being. But there are barriers there in terms of time, in terms of the guilt, in terms of the family who says, but you're not crazy. Why do you need that? And so that is something that I feel is very, it's specific to a lot of communities of color. It is specific to the Black community that I am a part of, that mental health stigma. Um, and just like the other stigma that we're beginning to break down those walls about, I think that this is one that we really need to face, because we're struggling as Black women and Black men, or Black individuals of any identity, to really wrap ourselves around the moments that we live in right now, that we're in a society that frankly sometimes just wants to kill us or make us not exist. And we're just human beings. And so that's, I could preach about this all the time, but going out and breaking down those barriers, I find myself privileged to be able to even say in a public forum that I have access to mental health resources when I know so many people don't, or they might have them, but because of stigma, they're not able to access them.
I also have a therapist. I was raised by white people, so I've been in and out of therapy my whole life. I love therapy. It's great. I love talking about myself. It's so fun. I have been in therapy for a long time. I consider it like a thing that I take on when I am in a moment of like a lot of stress and resilience. So I will take it on for like projects, like big things that are happening in my life, and I'm like, I need help with this transition right now, and then I'll phase out of therapy for a month to a year, and then I'll be back again for a while. And I just got a Black therapist here. It took me 3 years to find one, and she just got here in April, and she's already like booked forever. So it's really, really hard. When I just started with her recently. So prior to that, for me, it was really important to have all Black spaces, and also like QTPOC, so queer and trans people of color, or specifically Black queer spaces where I could just talk to people about what was going on and about my feelings, and like cry or hug people or whatever, to just, really talk about what like we were collectively experiencing, particularly this summer. So having spaces where we're able to just talk and feel, I think a big barrier for a lot of folks, and this comes out of some of the research that I did interviewing Black disabled activists, that folks with psychiatric and mental disabilities talked a lot about barriers in terms of faith and religion, that people have this idea that you can take it to God and you can pray it away. And it's not that those things can't help, but they are not psychiatry. They are not counseling. They are not therapy. They are not medicine if you need medicine. And so I think the stigma of mental health and of medication. So I try to be very open about my experiences with depression and anxiety, and identify myself as a Black disabled person, because I think that disability and mental health in particular has been used against Black folks for so long, right? That you're called crazy, you're called paranoid, or too sensitive, or whatever, all these things, violent, aggressive, to justify racial violence against us. So there have been ways that we have been forced to like hide our emotions, deny our emotions in order to keep ourselves safe from racial violence that is damaging to us, that we need to start undoing, particularly amongst ourselves and in community with one another. So I was just talking to a friend recently who was like, oh, I don't want to be the person who complains all the time. And I was like, you're talking about racism. That is not complaining. Like, that is rightful anger, like justified rage, right? So I think we need to like affirm each other's feelings and create spaces where we can talk to one another, but then also recognize when things reach a level where you need a professional, where you need professional assistance and potentially medication, and being okay with that, and even understanding the ways that racism and sexism and homophobia shape our minds and like impact our mental health. So those things are not just like inherent in our bodies, but are about our experiences of living in these body minds in the world.
Yeah, I think that they killed that question. I don't have anything in particular to add. I think they did a really good job on it.
Thank you, everyone. Keisha, I think are you up next? Yeah.
Sure, and I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Keisha Lindsay. I am a faculty member in Gender and Women's Studies and Political Science here at UW-Madison. And so I'll just sort of dive on in and sort of building on all the insightful answers and the feedback we've gotten so far. One of my questions is, what's the biggest challenge you face in attempting to balance the often competing demands of scholarship, activism, and wellness?
Me. I'm the biggest challenge. Yeah, it's me. Because as much as I want to look like I have it together and that I'm everything is balanced, I'm like a duck. You see, the duck is swimming so serenely, but underwater, those feet are just going. And so that, I think, in terms of finding the balance, is coming to an acceptance that the journey that we're on is a long one. And the mission that we're on is going to still be there after we're gone. And that's kind of hard. And so the biggest challenge in that balance is like, I want to be everything. I want to be well. I want to do the best work out there. All of those things. And so I love the questions and the ordering of the questions, because they really all feed on each other. Because, for me, with wellness meaning balance, it's accepting that this racism existed long before me. Sadly, it's going to exist after me. We will move things forward and break things down, and things will get better, and they will continue to get better. But this is a generational journey. So that, I think, has been the biggest challenge, is accepting that in myself and understanding that I'm part of a bigger community of people who are moving forward, always moving forward. And at some point, my role is going to be done, but that community is still going to be moving forward. So I'll stop there.
It's a tough question. There are a set of things that are not in my control that I think the movement seeks to gain control over, that are our greatest obstacles. I think about how, and I think I'm pretty great now. So, I want people to understand that when I'm about to say my next thing. I could just imagine who I would have been outside of oppression. You know, I could imagine how many other things I would have known or learned or done, how many other health things I wouldn't have to think about, just how I wouldn't have to be fighting the state for rights to my children as a queer father. I mean, there are just so many things that I would not have to concern myself with, and I could develop more fully as human in many ways. And so in my mind, sort of the answer is very easily that. It's the things that we are fighting against. And the other thing I'll say about that, part of why it's such a huge obstacle is we are punished for resisting. You know, I think I'll share this bit because she made it public, but I think about Alicia Garza, for example, who is one of the founding members of the Black Lives Matter Network, which is one of the member groups of Movement for Black Lives in which we're in leadership of. But I mean, they're regularly attacked, you know? There was just, the FBI found, or the planning of a white nationalist who had plans to murder her, to go to her home and murder her. And this person is from like Iowa, right? And so FBI intervened and did all this other stuff. But I'm saying this to say, you know, one, it's like the work you're doing is fighting the system of violence. But then the other thing is just the very work itself is dangerous because the thing is trying to destroy you. And so I think those are the biggest obstacles. I think I could think about wellness much more differently if I didn't have to consider a set of security things, or if I would think about taking breaks and stepping away and doing a bunch of other things much more differently if the stakes of the work wasn't so high. And so for me, that's what I'll name the things that we're fighting against.
I'm so glad you went before me, Em, because I was trying to figure out how to phrase this, and I had come up with like, I don't know, like lack of safety or like fear of repercussions, which I think like the oppression that we are dealing with is a much better way to say it. But yeah, that for me has been the challenge, is that, and this is on micro levels of like, do I speak up in a faculty meeting, or is this going to affect my tenure case, all the way up to, you know, do I keep showing up at events when there are white supremacists showing up with machine guns? Like how long do we do this? In what way do we do it? How do I make those choices? And living in a world that is like, so again, individualist and neoliberal, that like blames you for it. And that's the thing that I think I've been challenged with most recently the most, is that people saying things like, well, if you would just like be less public, be more quiet, do it in the background, right? Then people wouldn't be attacking you. Then people wouldn't be trying to get you fired all the time. But I'm like, but the point is to bring more people to this work. And so we have to be public and we have to be out there and connecting with people. And that means attracting the attention of people who want to do us harm. So yeah, that's the biggest challenge, is like making that decision of how much risk do we take? Yeah, and how safe can we make ourselves in doing the work? And I think everyone has a different level of risk that they can take. And that's one thing that I was grateful for, early mentorship in my like young activist life, of someone saying, you know, when you are young and don't have the same amount of bills and you don't have kids, like you can get arrested because you don't have to worry about somebody not being able to take care of your kids and then CPS coming and taking them, right? Like there's different risks that you can take depending on the other things in your life. And so, you know, there's no judgment for the kind of risks that people take and the kind of work that they do. But I think that for me has been the challenge of figuring out what risk I'm allowed to take, and how I can stay safe, and the people that I love stay safe too.
Great, thanks for those really helpful comments. I just sort of a follow-up question, and it's something I struggle with. So, you know, out of my own self-interest, I'm asking the question, but I'm wondering, in order to strike this balance between sort of, you know, scholarship, activism, wellness, how much do we actually need to redefine what constitutes sort of good scholarship or good activism? I think Sami, and you sort of alluded to that a little bit. So that's sort of my follow-up question. If it is even possible to strike this balance, how much does that depend on redefining what good scholarship is, defining what good activism is?
Well, at least for me right now, I've been thinking a lot about this question. I think this summer in particular, I was trying to work on my book and I was just like, why? When I could just go be in the streets for 12 hours, like that feels so much more pressing. And so I think I am still figuring this out, but I'm definitely at a point where I think that if I cannot tell you why this work matters to my liberation, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do a peer review of it. I don't care anymore unless I can see the value of it to liberation work. And that and there's all kinds of ways that that can be, right? But I want that to be, for me, centered in the work that I do. I just finished doing a bunch of archival work, but I'm looking at in archives of Black activists because I think that there's a lot that we can learn there that will be lost otherwise, and that's not being paid attention to by other scholars right now. So like that work feels important still because I want it to be out in the world. And I think that's the other piece too, that I want scholarship that goes out into the world and isn't in behind a paywall journal that no one can access. So trying to figure out how I get the work and the knowledge out into the world accessibly and affordably, because I don't want to just do research and then hold it to myself and be like, well, I'm so smart, look what I did. It needs to be work that is part of the movement and part of leading towards liberation, and that again can manifest in a lot of ways, but that feels really essential to me right now, and I'm still figuring out how to actually enact that. But yeah, things that don't feel like they have real practical purpose right now do not seem, they are not a priority for me right now.
That's part of the beauty of tenure, honestly. One of the things that I realized, so I'm being in the social sciences, and I imagine that many of you academically are in the humanities. There's a lot of the work that I've had to do, you know, I had almost like two tracks where it was I got to do this for a journal, this, that, and the other. But then I really need to go and talk to this group of teachers about how they need to be anti-racist in their work with Black children in their classrooms. And those two things were separate. And the way that they were experienced and heard from a tenure standpoint was that stuff that she's doing out there in the world, that's like community service work. But this other stuff is scholarship. And that is a big barrier that I experience. I think that's being torn down, at least in my School of Human Ecology. We have that expectation, but it is a problem. And I have found that you're absolutely right, Sami. It's like, well, so I'm going to do this right now. We've studied this. We've studied this shit enough, and now it's time to do something about it. It's been time, and so I think that yes, we do need to think about how we redefine scholarship, who has access to knowledge, because having the access to the studies and deciding, who gets to say that this research is valuable. Because there used to be no point in studying Black families because Black families didn't exist, or Black resilience did not exist. And so, yeah, I struggle with that same thing. So I think we do need a shift, and we can make that shift. That's also why it's important for those of us who are in the academy to stay in the academy, because that shift isn't going to happen until we make it occur.
Just a thought about this. So, evaluating this question from my vantage as like a non academic, I'm not in the academy. So I think there are different things. I think one, there are folks who are organizers and who organize inside of the academy. Like I think about Dr. Barbara Ransby, who has been a part of academic institutions for a very long time, is a prominent leader in that arena, but is also an organizer. Like I actually know Barbara from the ground. Like I don't know her from the classroom. I think about people like Dr. Beth Ritchie, Dr. Kathy Cohen, and just so many other, frankly, incredible Black women who saw, and I think this speaks to the first question about what is an activist scholar, but who saw their relationship to the academy is one of how to increase and further develop our radical Black thought leadership to serve movement, which I think is a very different orientation than getting a job and then figuring out how you volunteer. And I think because of that, there's not been a separation between them and our community. We don't see them as people over here and, oh, some snooty, and like, I'm in a meeting with them. I don't even know. I mean, when we bring them to meetings, people don't even know that they're doctors this, doctors that. So I think so much of it has to do with how you understand your involvement and your use of being able to do scholarship in service of movement. And I think that that's really important. The other thing is, I think, you all have opportunities and position to make interventions that we can't make in the same way, right? I just think about being in Madison in particular. Madison really prides itself in being a liberal bastion. And part of that is because of the university. And so I do think it's just incredibly powerful to have professors who align themselves with progressive or leftist politics, folks who weigh in on important social issues, and folks, even though we should need it, but for folks to back us, right? Like we have not gone past the point in which we need particular metrics or particular forms of research and to help us make our case. And so I think about the work of like Sami, and just as being a great example of someone who's inside of the academy, but who is in service of movement, and who, working with Sami and just learning from Sami for our No Cops in Schools campaign, for example, and saying, hey, help us deepen around disability justice. You're a thought leader in this area. Help us strengthen this, and not like, oh, come teach us, but like build with us. Like, you're a Black woman, you're in movement, and here's what your unique offering is. And I always say this, the movement needs skills, whatever those skills are. And I think the thing that we seek to counter is saying that one form of skill is inherently better or more valuable than another. But this, having the ability to really work out thoughts in a serious way, in a scientific way, is important. And the last thing I'll say about this is we read y'all. Like, that's the other thing. Not everybody, but many of us read you all. And many of us, I can't tell you the amount of times bell hooks has been quoted. I can't tell you the amount. I mean, intersectionality is a point, right? Like, I can't tell you the amount of radical Black thought developed by Black women forging their way through the academy, who see themselves in servitude of advancing Black liberation. That is all inside of our thinking. And now it's not the only thinking, but it's a big part of like, what we build on, and how we come to know what we know and be in relationship to it. And so I think there's a lot of room, and just historically, right, there really wasn't a separation between the interventions of developing historically Black colleges, people really deciding to study and to learn more and deepen, and that being part of movement. I mean, there just really wasn't the same divide then as it is now. And so I think we need to really shift the orientation around it.
All right, thank y'all all for those very generous responses. The whole time that you all have been talking, I've been, wishing that there was a snaps emoji, because the Zoom emoji claps don't do it. So thank you very much for your generosity, your candor, for your thoughtful responses. So we're running a bit short on time. And so I want to give the panelists, we got about 10 more minutes, we'll say. I want to give the panelists a chance to ask questions of each other if they have them. And then I want to use the remaining time to open it up to the audience. But really, again, you guys, this has been such a moving event so far. So thank you so much for your participation. Yeah. So panelists, if you have questions for each other, feel free to ask them. If not, folks, you can put questions in the chat. If no one has questions, I do have a question on deck that I will ask, but I did want to make space for other folks.
So full disclosure, I'm on the board for Free to Make, but I love to give Free to Make a chance to like brag on what they do. So my question's for M. M, can you talk about the way that Freedom Inc. incorporates like care and pleasure into like your work. I mean, yesterday, was it just yesterday? Oh, my days are gone. Maybe it was yesterday we were at a rally where like there was music and we were dancing and we were twerking, like we were taking up space. So can you talk about the importance of that for liberation work for y'all?
Yeah. So thanks for saying that, because I think so often people think that the movement is only protest, but the movement is the big umbrella of all the things that we are doing to build the new world. And protest is one of them, but so is joy making, community building, celebrating life, and many other things. And so yeah, we do a lot to really honor that we've made it, that we've survived. We do a lot to be like, and we're gonna keep surviving, like we're gonna keep thriving. And so just to name some things is like inside of our protests, we think about, and I think Tony Cade said this, to call on her again, is the role of revolutionaries is to make the movement unresistible or irresistible. And so we do things, right? Like we are like, let's have great music. People love music. Let's have food. How do we create an environment where people can bring their children, and not as just like in the periphery, but as a central part of the thing that we're going to do together? We break bread. We really do build kinship as part of our work. So we don't build things that are transactional, right? We're like, really, who are you? We're part of community. How do we build this thing together? And then also we do a lot of interventions around our staff. We come from the communities. We are the people that we talk about. And so we've done a lot to really create healthcare teams inside of the organization, to be creative around policy and trying to meet the specific needs that people are struggling with in their lives, and also really trying to adjust to make people sure people can be safe and as well as possible amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as just the rise of white nationalism. So we've had several different interventions, but just thanks for pointing that out, Sami, is that is an integral part of our work. It is not something we do at the end of it, but it's part of the world we're building.
So I don't know if folks saw, but Caitlin Gidi, I want to say, has asked a question in the chat about whether or not folks might elaborate on the stigma related to mental health.
Yeah, you know what? I'll take that one. So when you think about mental health stigma, it is exactly what you're talking about, the shame that people might feel. So we live in um, a society that oftentimes looks at physical and mental illness as moral shortcomings. And so and I've heard this, well, you just need to pray harder. And if you go for mental health services, that's a sign of a lack of faith. So I've heard that. God wouldn't give you more than you can handle is a big one. And so there's that aspect of it. It's is it a sign of weakness? Wasn't too long ago that we were thinking of mental illness and intellectual disabilities as character flaws and equating them together. And so those beliefs, they die hard. And in populations that are already vulnerable or underappreciated or devalued, they are amplified. And so that's really, I think, Caitlin, what you're right. It boils down to this idea of shame.
Yeah, I also want to add one thing that I've heard is this like comparative thing that's like, well, your great whoever like lived through slavery and you can't live through somebody like saying something passive aggressive to you in a meeting. And I'm like, yeah, but it's still like, so there's this idea that like, because it's somehow like less egregious, that somehow our mental health is supposed to be perfect now, and that there isn't this like long legacy of harm that has occurred. And again, I think we already mentioned this, but the religion and God stuff. In one of the interviews I did with T. Banks, who is a local Black disabled activist, his response was like, for his wellness, he needs Jesus and therapy, Jesus and medicine. Like those things are to come together. And so I think that's the other thing, is this idea that, that psychiatry and mental health, like medications are for white people by white people, which, we're white in many ways, yes, but also they can be good tools for us. So those are the things that I think can really stand in the way.
Yep. And we do that to each other too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, you just had somebody call you a name, I got shot at. None of those things should happen. They're both bad, and they're both trauma, they're both violence, and they both have an impact. And so we throw those things. Oh, well, I grew up in the hood, and you grew up bougie in the suburbs. There are different experiences, but it's still trauma and it still hurts. And so, that's the other thing that we run into.
So I want to respect folks' time. If no one else has any questions, I think we can let our panelists enjoy their Friday, and we can thank them once again for, just gifting us with their insight, with their candor, and with their time. So thank you. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Love and power.
Mhm.